So our next speaker traveled from New York to be with us today, and she is attorney Patricia Finn. She is the Good Health Lawyer, well known nationally for her important legal work involving vaccination rights. She's appeared on CNN, CBS, Fox News, and dozens of radio talk shows throughout the United States and Europe on the subject of autism, children's health, and religious and medical exemptions to refuse vaccinations. Thank you, ma'am, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Sorry to have you so far from the mic.
Thank you. That was a very nice introduction, except I should point out in the last 12 months, I haven't heard from a reporter, CNN, Fox, Google, you name it. We are heavily censored. Before we began, we were talking about the fireside chats, and the question popped up about censorship. So I know I'm not alone, that all of us who have any type of message that is not mainstream, that is not pharma blessed, is being oppressed. And this is very frightening. I've been involved in vaccine injury and civil rights for over 20 years, and I enjoyed great success early on and won many cases predicated on a lack of informed consent. And it was wonderful, and then all of a sudden it ended. Last year in New York, we had a measles outbreak. Many of you remember the prequel to COVID. I like to think of that as the training wheels for epidemics. And as a result of that, a local official, our county executive, excluded non-vaccinated children from public places. At this point, the courts have just choked out pretty much all relief. If you challenge police power, you're not going to do well, although your federal judge here in Pennsylvania, he issued a decision that was stayed in the Third Circuit, but it was important because Pennsylvania, this federal judge was the first judge to actually take a look at Jacobson versus Massachusetts, which is the police power case that all of these other cases are springing out of. And until this decision, I would say every case, even the ones that I have brought, always leaned towards the government's right of police power. So when you see legislation like you've proposed, it's like, oh, thank heavens, finally, somebody is addressing that. But anyway, back to measles last year in New York. A very aggressive vaccination program. There is an Orthodox community that has been heavily targeted by pharmaceutical companies. And rather than try to attack police power, which without legislation like what is being proposed today, it is a losing argument. What I have attempted to do is to prove there is no epidemic. And, before you gasp and think, of course there's an epidemic. Really? I don't think so. When you look at the number of measles cases, or even let's focus on COVID, I'll let the doctors discuss the math, but you're looking at an illness that has a very harmless potential prophylactic treatment that is definitely not as dangerous as a vaccine. You're looking at a 99% or greater recovery rate. Even if you accept the total numbers of deaths caused by COVID, which I would argue have been inflated. We know that medical offices are being incentivized to code deaths as COVID when they may not be. But even if you were to take the total number of deaths and to divide it into the population, you don't even break 1%. And, you need a 7% mortality rate for an epidemic. So I respectfully argue we don't even have an epidemic. And in last year in Rockland County, I went into a courtroom, took me 15 minutes. I didn't have to bring an expert. I didn't have to have a jury. I didn't have to do anything. I went in, I agreed to every single number that the government said. They argued we were in the midst of a deadly pandemic, not epidemic, and we had 2 active measles cases, okay? They said to, I agreed. I stipulated to their numbers, but when you calculated it into the population, it came to 0.05%. And fortunately, this judge, in his wisdom, ruled no epidemic, and of course, then vacated this order. You would think that never happened, because I talk to health officials all the time, and they tell me, didn't you hear about the measles epidemic? And I say to them, didn't you hear about the judge who said there was no epidemic? So right now, I am currently in front of the Supreme Court of the United States. I have a petition for cert pending, and it deals exactly with informed consent. My client, who is very much in your son's cohort, was vaccinated as a baby with a mercury-containing vaccine. This kid had 20 vaccines in the first year of his life. He was beginning to exhibit symptoms of regression. His doctor kept saying the kid is fine, he's fine. He had his last vaccine, and he slipped into autism, and he has never been heard from again. This child applied for compensation in vaccine court and was denied. In the end, ultimately, we were able to uncover that CDC and Merck both had data showing that the aerosol, the mercury in the vaccines, was causing brain injury, and that information was withheld. So I would ask you, when you are considering informed consent, that there is a flip side to that. The manufacturer has to be disclosing the harm. And if we are relying on Merck to tell us the vaccines are safe, yet we have tape recordings, news interviews, reports, where they're admitting outwardly that they're not, similar to COVID, right? I mean, you have doctors that are telling you it is not the deadly epidemic, but yet, we are terrifying people. So, I really commend you. I'm usually in such hostile environments, and to be around reasonable people that are willing to address such a fundamental issue as informed consent. And I say, you can't make me do it. You cannot make me do it, and you won't make me do it. So anyway, thank you for having me. God bless you all, and keep praying and keep the faith. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Attorney Patricia Finn. We had some clapping. We have very few people in here today, just to minimize the number of people here today, but we don't generally get clapping at press conferences, but Attorney Finn certainly deserved some applause there for hopefully the audience that we're streaming to was applauding for you also. But thank you for traveling here from New York. Thank you for sharing your expertise and your experiences with us. It's such a, when you have a press conference like this, it needs to be fast moving enough that keeps people tuned in and paying attention but the information that we have here today that's being summarized by these experts is invaluable to helping people understand the nature of the battle that we're in, and ensuring that people understand that they have a right to informed consent, that they have a right to refuse, and that there's people here like these experts that are doing research, that are making arguments, that are able to lend their expertise to let them know that their informed consent ultimately is backed up by experts' opinions also.